Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel, and if you're new to my channel or coming from Brooke's channel, my name is Gabby and welcome. So today I'm doing a collab with basically my true crime soul sister, Brooke Makenna. I absolutely love her content. We have very similar ways of doing our videos. She is so sweet, she is so respectful, and she covers a lot of vintage cases, which I absolutely love. That was one of my goals for this year, was to do more collabs on my channel, and I feel like I've been sticking to that goal. I've been doing quite a few lately, and today's video I'm super excited for because I'm talking about a case that I've wanted to talk about for so long now, and it's also incorporating a YouTuber that I absolutely adore. After this video is over, definitely go check out Brooke's channel, and let's get right into the video. So last month, my theme for the month was July, which had to do with cases that revolve around lies. And this month, I'm going to be doing August. So every case that I cover this month is going to keep you guessing. At the end of every video, you're going to be left guessing who did it, how they did it, or how they're going to finally catch the person who did it. And that's kind of what's going on with this case. The case that I'm covering today, I've wanted to do for a while. I got reached out to probably over a year ago by a friend of the daughter of the victim. So the victim we're talking about, her daughter's really good friend, reached out to me and wanted me to cover her friend's mother's case. I did talk to the daughter myself, Shuri, so thank you, Shuri, for talking to me and letting me do this video and share your mother's story. So with all that being said, let's get into the case. This is the heartbreaking case of Nancy Jo Canode. Nancy Jo Canode was a dark-haired beauty, a 39-year-old woman described as being very likable and extremely committed to her 3 children, her husband, and her church. On March 3rd, 1981, she became the victim of a tragic murder.
Earlier that morning at 6:39 a.m., Nancy's daughter Susan would leave their house with her stepfather, Ken. They would walk out the front door, Susan first, Ken next, locking the door behind him. Now, Susan would go down the street and wait for a friend, but she noticed that Ken would get into his vehicle and it would take him a good 5 minutes to drive away from the home. Now, Susan would go on to school, and of course Ken drove away, and Ken would later say he waited to make sure Susan was actually going to school. Now, Susan went off that day, but she would come home to something that she would never forget. Susan said, "I walked up the stairs and I saw my mother's feet just inside her bedroom, along with a lot of blood. I decided not to go in the room any further, so I ran to the neighbor's house to get help. She said she doesn't know exactly what it was, but something in her stopped her. She says she remembers crying and screaming as she ran to the neighbor's home. The neighbor she ran to was Doris Cadenhead, who lived 2 doors down. She says the day it happened, she remembers around 3 o'clock she heard a terrible screaming and crying. It was Suzanne. Suzanne fell into her arms and said, 'My mother's been murdered.'"
So we do know she was attacked. We do know the call was disconnected. If one was being attacked and forced to hang up the phone, you would expect the phone to possibly be laying on the ground. It wasn't. The phone was still sitting neatly on the shelf, which is also very odd. There was a jewelry box that was turned over, almost like it was made to look like a robbery gone wrong. According to Doris, something very strange happened before the murder. They all lived in a gated community. There were rarely any suspicious people coming around the area. But about 3 weeks before the murder, Doris recalled a man knocking on her door. He wanted to sell photos. He was a photographer. Doris was concerned with how he got through the gate and even ended up mentioning it to Nancy not long after, and Nancy said the man also visited her. Doris just found it weird that this was the only time she ever remembered anything like this happening while living there, and it just so happened to occur weeks before Nancy's life was taken.
Well, there was no 911 emergency service back in 1981, but Nancy did call the operator, and the operator that answered was Loretta Brown. Now, Loretta said on an interview for Cold Justice that Nancy sounded like she was in a panic, but it also sounded like there was someone else in the home at the time. Now, Loretta actually pushed a button at this time to forward the call to her supervisor, but when the supervisor got on the line, Nancy was no longer on it, and they couldn't trace calls back then. When the St. Johns County Sheriff's Office deputies arrived, they found Nancy with a rope tied tightly around her neck. She had been stabbed multiple times with an ice pick and a steak knife. The knife had been taken from the kitchen and was left on her back. Detective Neil Perry said it was one of the most brutal murders he had ever seen. He said it was easy to see there was a struggle, but there was absolutely no sign of forced entry into the home. It was theorized that the person entered through the back sliding door because the wooden dowel used to block the door was found nearby out of the door track.
After the police were finally called, they went to the location and they ended up doing what any officers would do. They phoned Nancy's husband. Nancy and Kenneth had been married about 2 years at this time. They told him there was an emergency at his home in Ponte Vedra Beach. Kenneth at the time was supposedly traveling in Georgia on a business trip. He was escorted back to Jacksonville by police, deciding to follow their vehicle instead of ride in the back of it. Kenneth was allowed to view his wife's body, but his reaction wasn't what you would expect from a grieving husband. If you just lost somebody, especially a spouse, somebody you're supposed to be closest to in life, you would be torn apart and it would be written all over your face. It would be easy to tell how heartbroken you are by it. But this just wasn't the case with Ken. His reaction was described as being emotionless. Nancy's daughter Shuri, who was 19 at the time, said, "I was at work when I got the call. And I remember driving what must have been 120 miles an hour the entire way to the condo. But when I got to the condo, the one thing that really stuck with me was him. That man did not shed a single tear."
It didn't seem like Ken was too affected at all, and there was even more evidence to back that up. Ken's ex-wife told authority years after the murder that about a week before the murder, Ken had visited her and he told her how unhappy he was with Nancy. He told her he would do anything to get out of the marriage, even telling his ex-wife to let their son and her other son know that he would be coming back to all of them. She asked Ken how he would get out of the marriage, and he basically told her not to worry. He would find a way. That's just the first part. Ken also had taken out a life insurance policy on his wife, which would pay double if it was the result of a violent death. In the end, Ken received a $160,000 payout. With the money, he would end up renting his ex-wife and children a new home. His reasoning for the insurance policy was that he was an insurance salesman, it wasn't uncommon, and it seemed like the right thing to do. So at this point, Mr. Kenneth Canode looked very suspicious. To add to it, he was also having an affair. When it comes to this woman, she knew that Ken had a wife, and he had even gone to her the day after the murder, telling her how his wife had been murdered. Now, after the funeral, Ken actually booked a mini vacation and checked into a hotel under a different name with a woman. This woman said that it wasn't her that went, and so it's theorized that if this woman is telling the truth, Ken could have been seeing multiple women behind Nancy's back.
A woman that Ken dated 4 years after the murder in 1985 was interviewed, and what she had to say was very interesting and just shows the type of person Ken was. She claimed she met him at a bar not long after her husband had passed away. Ken moved into her home about 2 weeks later. She said at this time she had a lot of money, and Ken completely took advantage of that. She even lost her home as a result of it. He somehow found a way to take out money from her bank account, would buy her very expensive items she had no idea her own money was buying. He would spend nights out of the home. She received word that he was spending a lot of time at a local bar, so she decided to go to the bar. She saw Ken in the bar, and as soon as he spotted her, he left. When she later went out to her car, there was a note left on it that read, "If you know what's good for you, you won't follow me." It was written by Ken. Ken had many girlfriends and many wives after Nancy died, and most of them, a majority of them, came forward with very similar stories of how he was as a significant other. His second wife said that he would steal money from her often, and he had a huge problem when it came to gambling, which is very interesting because another wife came forward and said that when they were married to Ken, he told them that it was Nancy who had a problem with gambling and that she was probably killed by somebody she owed money to. So it looks like Ken was actually the one who had the gambling problem. Gambling was something that all of Nancy's friends and family said she never had a problem with. Another thing is that if Ken was so sure that gamblers had taken his wife's life, why didn't he ever mention that to police?
Ken's wife that he was married to before Nancy, Letha Shoemaker, the one who he had visited a week before the murder, said that while they were married, he acted the same way. Her son was supposed to have his appendix operated on, and Ken actually stole the insurance money that was meant to pay for the operation. She said that she saw on TV that Nancy had been murdered, and it didn't surprise her. She claimed Ken was never sad over the murder. Not a bit. At this point, if you think everything points to Ken, this next part will blow your mind.
Not long before Nancy's murder, Letha's cousin, Deborah's husband, received a call from Ken. Ken told him that he had a job for him in which he could make some money, about $10,000, and it just so happened to involve killing someone. That somebody he was referring to was his wife, Nancy. Deborah's husband initially thought it was a joke, but agreed to meet with Ken the next day to see exactly what was going on and if Ken was actually serious about doing such a thing. He said he went to meet him, and as he walked up to the car, he saw Ken in the vehicle along with a few other people. People he knew were bad news. So he went back to his car and drove off. That was the last time he ever saw or heard from Ken. Well, Ken did end up suing the county for not responding to Nancy's original call sooner. But the thing is, how did he know that she made a call if he wasn't home? This was not public information, and police asked him how he knew that she ever made a call. It wasn't released to anybody that she did. And he said he found out from a friend who worked at the phone company, but he refused to tell them who it was. They finally got it out of him, and he said that it was a friend of his named Jimmy Stokes. So police obviously went to Jimmy Stokes and asked him his side of the story, if he actually told Ken about Nancy making a call that day when she was being attacked. Jimmy Stokes was very surprised by Ken's claim that he had told him that Nancy made a call. He said that he did not have this information, and even if he did, he would have never told Ken because he would have ended up losing his job because of this. If you work at a phone company and you get a call, it doesn't matter how severe it is, you can't go telling people that this call was made. So again, it looks like Ken was lying. Ken, through the years, it just never really seemed like he cared much when it came to Nancy's case. He never really put in much effort to finding out who possibly took her life, maybe because he knew who did it. You would think that if somebody's spouse was brutally murdered, that they would put in some sort of effort, or at least bare minimum, throughout the years, phone the police station to see if there's any updates in the case. Ken never did this. Ken is still alive in today's time, and he refuses to discuss anything about Nancy's case with authorities, and he refuses to do any interviews with any reporters. This is a case that most fingers point to one individual, and you're kind of left guessing what's gonna happen next. It's been so many years since this happened, and of course, most people do lean towards one theory in particular, but there's just no solid evidence to prove that theory to be true. There was a lot of lies told in this case. There was a lot of suspicious behavior, but if you have no solid proof, you can't really do much, and that's the unfortunate part. My heart goes out to Nancy's family because I can't even imagine how devastating it must be to believe with all your heart that you know what happened to your loved one and not be able to do anything, to feel so helpless in this situation. As soon as I was requested this case a while back, I knew I had to cover it eventually, and I wanted to get the story across, and I hope that I did a good job of that. Like always, leave your opinions down below in the description of this video, and make sure to send a little bit of love over to Nancy's children and loved ones down below in the comments. And of course, go check out Brooke's channel because this was a collab with her. And I will see you guys in my next video.